Alright, so I don't know how many of you have actually watched The Simpsons. I believe it's the longest running cartoon, if not show. It's been running since I was probably a preteen. And I was a preteen 35 years ago or more. So it's been running for a pretty long time. But anyway, Flanders, the guy who had this complete hissy fit, if you've never watched it, Flanders is a Christian. And Flanders is always portrayed as a super goody two-shoes. So him having this fit, you see why everybody was so appalled. There's certain behavior that you expect from certain people, either because that's the way they project themselves, or that's the image that you project on those people. There are certain things that I may say or do that someone say, whoa, but you're a pastor. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with what I said. I can't have an opinion. I can be angry. So there's certain things that are projected on us as believers, and then there are others that we project to others, so that when something is different, then people realize it right away. So I have a image of Pastor Green there, because Pastor Green taught this past Tuesday his lesson series on spiritual warfare. And as I'm listening to it, I'm hearing what he's saying, and I'm saying, this connects perfectly with what we're already talking about. I was going to take and cut out that little clip, which I should have, but there's no excuse for that now. I was just lazy and didn't bother doing it. That clip during last week's lesson from Tuesday's lesson, where I said, there is a struggle that happens. So we don't just act and react in this world because of ourselves or because of somebody else. There is real spiritual warfare that happens. So I thought we would jump back into that just a little bit. And today's lesson is called The Grace of Knowing Life in the World. There are three things that are constantly against us. And that's the world, and we'll talk about what that means, the flesh, and the devil. The world, the flesh, and the devil. It's easy to think of the devil and think, well, the devil made me do it. The devil can't make us do anything. The devil may, in some way, shape, or form, and we're not going to get all into that, in some way, shape, or form, help lead our thoughts in a particular direction, but we ourselves are the ones that take action, that act on what we believe or what other people do, or how we are instigated or encouraged in a particular direction. So we're not necessarily in one passage today. We're going to look up 3 verses, and they're all from the Apostle John. So this is your big idea. We'll do it in the beginning and at the end. We all face multiple choices whether we will allow ourselves to be dragged downstream, or be led by the Spirit to make God-honoring choices and swim upstream. Let me read that again. We all face multiple choices whether we will allow ourselves to be dragged downstream or be led by the Spirit to make God-honoring choices and swim upstream. It is easy to just let go and be dragged downstream. Dahlia and I went to Colorado in January, I think.
June.
In June. In June?
Mm-hmm.
That was that long ago?
No. That just very short.
3 months ago.
3 months ago.
That seems like forever ago. Well, we went to the Colorado River, and because it comes off of the snow that's melting, that water was so cold. I remember being a little kid and living in the city. They would open the fire hydrant, and people would lock their arms and pull the water up with so much pressure it would shoot up like a rainbow, an arc. And that first hit, it was like, ah! Because the water was so cold. I hadn't felt water that cold since I was a kid, but the current was so strong. It was fascinating to see these teenagers jumping off a rock, jumping in, and just letting the current take them, and they would slowly swim. They're swimming straight, but it's carrying them over, and they would be like a half a block down, and then they would walk back to the rock and do it again. And it was interesting to watch natives, right? People who live there, and that sound like aborigines, right? People who live there and knew that and can control their environment. But then a woman let her child do it, and she panicked. She was like, ah, and she ran over there and grabbed the kid because he couldn't pull himself back in. But so it's easy to be pulled downstream, and it will take you. Just like this world will take you. Your flesh will take you. The devil cannot make you, but he will take you in a very particular direction. But to swim upstream is a choice. It is something that you have to do, and you have to continually do, or the moment you stop, you will go backwards 100 times faster than you were moving forward. So no need to make that sound depressing, but it is a reality in the life and the world that we live in. So we have the Apostle John here. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute, but this idea of the world, right? John, at least 10 different ways he speaks of the world. So when we speak of the world, it's not just one thing. It is, it could be a number of things. That I say, if we were at club and it says, okay, we're all going to get ice cream, and then we all went, and I said the whole world went out to get ice cream. Well, that's not everybody, including and the whole planet. That's everybody who was in the room at the time and heard the call and went with us, right? So the same word can mean different things, even with that same person talking within one book. And then you have the Apostle Paul talking about the world. You have the Apostle, or you have James' brother talking about the world. You have Peter talking about the world. So it's not that they mean different things, but we need to be careful that what we're reading, we are reading it in context, in what it is meant to be understood at that time. So in the Gospel of John, the Apostle John wrote the book of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and he wrote the book of Revelation. He speaks of the world 55 times just in the Gospel of John. He speaks of the world 18 times in 1 John, 1 time in 2 John. And although he doesn't mention the world, he does talk about behavior. He says in verse 3 and 4, 2 times the same exact thing, walking in the truth. Verse 5, acting faithfully. Verse 11, beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. So that was in the heart of what he was talking about. And in Revelation, he mentions it 6 times. So he has more to say about the world than any other gospel writer. So the Apostle John, this is the world that he lived in. Now, the world that we live in is made up of culture and subculture. So culture is a larger context? No, a larger thing, right? No, for lack of a better word, right? So we could say there's culture in Berwyn, right? We could say there's culture in the Midwest. Like some people say pop, some people say soda, and and there's a big debate on that and what it is. Whether it's thin crust pizza or deep dish, and what's best. Hot
Whether
dogs.
it's gym shoes or tennis shoes.
Gym shoes or tennis shoes, or as the Puerto Ricans say, tenis. Or sneakers, right? So that's part of a larger culture. And then we have subculture, because even like within the church, there's a subculture. There are things that people do in the church. Although I live in Berwyn, it may be different than living in Cicero or Lyons or Brookfield. But then living here in Stickney, right? I go to a church and there's a subculture within the church. There's certain behavior that happens as a church, as a culture, that could be called a subculture. So John himself was the youngest of the apostles, and he was the one that lived to the oldest. So he may have been a teenager when he was called to Christ, and then he died as a 90-plus-year-old man of natural causes on an island. All the other disciples were killed for their faith, and he was too, because he was exiled to that island, because not rumor has it, but legend, rumor, whatever has it, that they tried killing him in different ways and they couldn't kill him, right? That's not recorded for us in official history, but that's what they say. But anyway, we're not getting into that. He was part of the inner circle of Jesus. So Jesus had 12 disciples. Jesus had many, thousands of disciples, but he had the 12 that were chosen. And then within the 12, there were 3 who were privy to certain things that Jesus did, and for Jesus' own reasons, did not allow the other disciples to be part of that. It could be because later he would be the one to write about these particular things, as well as Peter, but James was also one of them. So it was James, John, and Peter who were always the three that went in when he closed the door and did things that he didn't allow other people to see, right, to witness of. He's the younger brother of James. They say because his name is always put after, more than likely he was the younger brother. He was a son of thunder. James and John were called sons of thunder. So when you think of Peter, I always think of foot and mouth disease, right? He's always speaking before he thinks. These guys were ready to act. These guys were ready, like, God, should we, or they said, Jesus, should we call down lightning from heaven and destroy these people? And so they had great faith, but they weren't always like, they were ready to jump before they think things through. So they were men of action, right? James and his brother John. He was the only the apostle not to be killed for his faith. Like I said, the other ones were literally killed. He was, in a sense, killed because he was put on an island, supposedly because he couldn't be killed, to die there of natural causes, which gave us the book of Revelation, because that's where God met him and then showed him the things that pertain to the end. He lived on Roman-occupied land, so although he was living in the place of his ancestors, they weren't ruled by his own people. They were sub-ruled in some way by his own people, but it was ruled by the Roman government. And he was also a fisherman. But it doesn't mean that he was poor, because it was part of a family business. So all of this tells you a lot about the person of the Apostle John, his world, his culture, and maybe his subculture. But what about us, our world today? We have materialism, freedom, success, power. These are all things we talked about on Tuesday. Rights, equality. This was interesting, because Pastor Green pointed out there's equality, which means that everyone gets the same thing, and then there's equity, that everyone has the same thing. And there's a really big difference. Mm-hmm. And some people would say, well, this is fair, this is not. Because look at this poor guy, that would be me, I can't see over the fence, and this would be Bobby over here, he can see over the fence, right? That'd be Miss Dahlia. So, with short hair, and her hair sticking up. But some people would say, no, this is better. But who decides this? Who decides to take? And Pastor Larry, who most of you do not know, but Pastor Larry would often say, some people want to take from the rich and give to the poor. And it sounds good when you consider yourself poor. He says, but if you go to the millions of people that live in India, the poorest person in Chicago, so that's all of us, right? The poorest person in Chicago, in the suburbs of Chicago, is richer than the richest person, not the richest person, than the average person in India. He says, do you want them to come to your house and take whatever they will please so that they can have the same thing that you have? Right? So it sounds good when you feel like you're poor and you can take from someone else and make your life better. But it's different when it's somebody seeing you as the rich person and they take from you the stuff that you feel that you've earned. Now, it's good to be generous. It's good to help other people. But for people to take what they want, that's a whole different story.
Well, look how happy that purple guy was.
Yeah, purple guy was happy. So equality, justice, education, individualism, security, peace, information, transparency, recognition, beauty. These are all things that the class, there were about 19, 20 of us, including Pastor Green, that came up with this idea. It's like, what would you say people value in our world today? Specifically, and not necessarily where we are at here in Berwyn or in Stickney or in this area, and all of these fit. Now, Ms. Dahlia said, well, wait, but these things aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves. And he's like, no, they're not. He says, but these things, apart from God, then become a bad thing. I want equality, but not equality as God sees equality. I want equality on my terms. Mm-hmm. I want material things, but the lust for them is bad, and we're going to talk about that. Or freedom, or success, or power, nationalism, religion. read some interesting things about Plato and power and how he feels that people should be governed, because he's seen the democracy of his day and he says this is garbage because only the powerful people get to make the decisions, and or get to make decisions that they feel are right. But anyway, we're not going to get into that. So moving on from there, it was John's world, then our world today, and then we talk about what John actually wrote. It seems like it's going to be a very short lesson because I know what comes after this. John wrote, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish or shall not perish, but have eternal life." So here, when he says God so loved the world, he's not talking about the planet. He's talking about the people that live in the world. Some people would make a distinction and say it's a particular people that live in the world, but regardless, these are people that live in the world. Yes.
People for all time, or just people in the world at that time?
Right? That's a good question. Now, I would say because we're reading this now, and because another one of the writers of the epistles, I can't remember who it is now, he says these things were written not just for our sake, but for the sake of those who would read them later, right? So it's important that we understand it in a context so that we don't take somebody else's promises and make it ourselves. But this is written for us, so that even John himself at the end of the book, in John 20, I think 31, he says, "And these things were written so that you would believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God." Right? Or something like that. Or you go back and look for it yourself and then get back to me. So this is the world, the people that live in the world. But then he turns around and says in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 and 17, "Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God lives forever." So it's interesting that he doesn't say the one who puts their faith in Christ lives forever, but he says the one who does the will of God lives forever. Now that shouldn't put fear in somebody to say, "What if I'm not doing the will of God all the time?" This is pattern and practice, not something that people do from time to time, right? And this is an outworking of something that happened on the inside, right? Because if it was natural, then you would be driven by this world system, this world's values. Going back to all of these things, you would be driven to have more, to want to be free, even of God himself. Right? To have success at all costs, even if I have to step on somebody, even no matter what I have to do, to have power and to want that power for wrong reasons. Nationalism, Pastor Green talked about nationalism being different than patriotism. Nationalism has to do with your country, right, making your country better than others, rather than patriotism having a love for your country. Religion, as opposed to a relationship with God and just being religious, right? Apart even from God, because sometimes people just do things for God so that they would receive from God, or so they wouldn't be under God's curse, or because they're afraid of God. But we can go on in each one of these, and you can see how they can become corrupt. Education, people can educate themselves out of, and this I'm going to say very carefully, people can educate themselves out of Christianity. There's one man who's part of my class, and he says he has a sister who earned a PhD in world religions, I think it was, or regardless of what it was, he says, but after her studies, she gained her doctorate, but lost her faith, her Christian faith in God. Right? So she continues to teach and to be a part of that academic world, but it's all here. It is no longer here. She educated herself out because of her thinking. Now, that doesn't happen to everybody. One of the first books I read was by a doctor, a woman who studies epistemology, which is a really big word. I'm not going to get into that. has to do with knowing and why we know what we know, or how can we know what we know, epistemology, ontology. And super smart woman, had to have a dictionary with me the whole time I'm reading. But this woman, at the age of 14, had these thoughts, and then heard someone, I think she was given a book, and by a guy named Os Guinness, and he was a Christian writer, but he would write it as a philosopher, and he would, and how it impacts the world that he lives in. And she's like, whoa, people think, period. People think, period. And then people think like me? People have questions like me? She thought, if I'm in a church, I'm just meant to keep my mouth shut and just listen to what he's saying and just kind of cram it down into my heart and my soul and believe it. No. We are meant to debate. We are meant to talk. We are meant to reason. We are meant to think. God is not, he's not going to shrink back from our questions. I may have a question and you're going to say something to me and I'm like, I have no idea. And I might look and wonder, and maybe it'll be something that will be a trip for me, or stumbling block for me, but God is not. That woman went on to become a philosopher, but her quest led her to a deeper and deeper and deeper faith of God, which is why we're even looking at what we're looking at today, because this is the color of her book, and the name of her book is The Little Book of Knowing. So this is why we have this idea of the grace of knowing, and we actually use that. If you want to go back on the YouTube channel, we use that as a springboard to talking about knowing to love as opposed to loving to know as opposed to knowing to love. You can go back and you can read that. All right. So he says, do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, love of the Father is not in him. For that is in the world, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father. So there's this struggle, and the lure is not going to be that your body wants things or that your eyes see things that is desirable, but the key word there is lust. Keyword there is lust. Boastful pride, not just pride, boastful pride. Because being proud is a good thing. We should have pride in the work that we do. And we can't help that our eyes notice things that are beautiful. There are things that are beautiful. Another Plato thing that I was reading this morning was that he says he calls them forms with a capital F. There's forms in this world, certain things that just are. And if there are certain things that just are, why are they? And then he goes back to that first thought. Fascinating stuff when you think about it. But still, when you try to reason with yourself and you're a fallen being, you're going to come to fallen conclusions. That's why God had to reveal to us what he would have us know about himself and the world that we live in. And this is not a science book. This is not a history book. But when there is science and when there is history, it should reflect a God who knows the world that he has made. So he says 5 times here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times here, this world. This is a system. This is how people put value in things apart from God, and they want those same values for you, right? Presidential race, going back to that. People they have certain values. Are they the values of the world, or are they the values of God, right? And they may sound the same, but they might have different motives, right? Different motives. And I'm talking about on both ends. Why do people say and do what they do, right? So, last passage for today, this arrow, I should have erased it. It has nothing to do with anything there. So, this should have been right after that slide with all the different things talking about the culture or what we value today. Because Pastor Green pointed this out. He says John, writing, and I love that he used all John passages, right? And he used probably about 8 or so. I didn't want to go into all that because we had an hour and a half with him. No songs, let's just start teaching, bam, no bathroom break, and wearing a mask the whole time, and socially distant. This should be moved over a little bit, all right? But look what it says here. Now looking at the end, right? John, the Gospel of John, now looking at the end of the Bible, it says, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensually with her, right? And with her this idea of the great city Babylon. Now go back a few lessons, and you see people at the time is 1125. You see people in that they decide we're not going to listen to God. We're not going to follow His cultural mandate to go forth and multiply and fill the earth and to cultivate and to keep it, to subdue and to rule it. Right? Go back and look at that lesson if you have time and if you want. Those people decided to do the very thing that God didn't want them to do. Now, God did not punish them and send them in different directions. God said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. My plan will not be stopped even by man himself. Man will fill this earth. Man will spread out. And man will fill it with my image. Even though His image is in each of us, we each have worth. We each have value. But it is a corrupted image nonetheless, which is why we want justice, but we don't want it our way, not His way. We want equality, but we want it our way, not His way. Right? So now going to the end, He says, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and live essentially with her, this world system, right? World system will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and of silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, iPods, computers, tablets. No, it doesn't say that. So you got to wonder, does the world go backwards and we don't have any of those things anymore at this point in time? Or is He just describing things the way He sees them and the way He could understand them at the time He wrote it? Either way. And precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk, scarlet, every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and articles made from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargoes of horses and chariots, and get this, and slaves and human lives. Slaves, human lives. Pastor Green pointed out that in the end, people will still try and make money, and they will sell whatever they can in order to do it, to even sell people. Now, I would imagine the distinction here is slaves, those who would be put up to work for you, and then human lives, those who necessarily not work, but you can own them. I don't know, there's a distinction there. If you want, you can do your own history there and dig in and tell me what it means, because I'm not going to do it. We'll move on to our next lesson. But in the end, everything that this world tells us is valuable, we will not have, and it will be gone. So if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, if you're doing everything you can to have more in this world, and even if God were to choose to take it from you now, will that shake your faith in such a way that you will lose it? Or that you will wonder about God's goodness? Or will you understand it clearly that this is the grace of knowing life in this world? We have human bodies. We have human needs. We have feeling, intellect, emotion. We have legitimate, good desires. We have good intentions and pride. But will we allow the world to take us to a place where it is unhealthy? Unhealthy. God determined from the beginning we would have life in a body, and in the end, we will have life in a body again. So we say this again. We all face multiple choices, whether we will allow ourselves to be dragged downstream or be led by the Spirit of God and make God-honoring choices and swim upstream. Right? So I think that's the end of our lesson. We have one silly thing at the end. Let's bow our heads and let us pray, and then we'll show it to you. And then there'll be a short video at the end, and I will be gone because I'm preaching third service. Woo! All right? In Espanol. Pray for me. Father, thank you so much for some time to talk and to look at your word. Father, it is amazing what you have said such a long time ago, and that it carries so much weight and truth even today. Father, what are we living for? What is pushing our desire? What is waking us up in the morning? What is moving us throughout the day? These are things that we do need to think about, or else we will be taken and dragged downstream. Father, help us to engage this world and its culture thoughtfully, and that we would learn to continually swim upstream. We do thank you for our time together. We ask you your blessing on our week, and that we would come back together on Wednesday. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, here we go. Silly time, I think. Yes.
Oh my
In case you
goodness.
missed it. The face, I don't know if you can see it clearly, the face that he made.
Disgust. It's disgust.
Rage. He didn't even eat the two pieces. Letty would have ate the two pieces.
Yeah, she would have.
How dare you?
That's savage.
So guys, have a great week. I love you guys. And hasta